The Business of the Music Business with Erica von Kleist.
Welcome to another episode of The Business of the Music Business with yours truly, Erica von Kleist. This episode is about contracts. Oh look, a disclaimer. This says that Erica is not providing actual legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, so only take the information in this video as anecdotal from my own personal experiences. See? I'm already covering my butt. Contracts are essential to your professional and financial success. They're your line of defense when paving your path to prosperity in a world laden with potential legal landmines. They provide an abundance of clarity and also act as your recourse when things get sticky between you and whomever you're working with. What constitutes a contract? Well, there's some gray area here, but in general, a contract is a document that's been signed and agreed to by multiple parties. It contains details or obligations relating to the gig, expectations, caveats, liability clauses, or anything else should there be a dispute or if something should go wrong. Traditionally, a contract is a signed document, either hard copy or e-signed, although in today's world, text messages and emails have actually held up in court. But in general, an actual signed document is always the way to go. So why have a contract? Let's say you're doing business with someone you know or you've worked with many times in the past. You guys are buddies and you'd never screw each other over ever, right? Well, imagine that your friend hires your jazz trio to play at his mom's 75th birthday party. Everything's going great until drunk uncle gets a little tipsy on the dance floor, trips on your extension cord, and falls on your $5,000 guitar. Who is at fault here? Who pays for the cost of your guitar or any injuries? If you don't have a contract that outlines the contingency plan for these types of things, you could be in some murky water. You could not only lose a lot of money over this, but you could also lose a friend, which is even worse. And trust me, I've seen it happen. A basic contract should contain the following: the names of both the client, the person hiring you, and the artist, which is you, with full names and addresses. Details about the gig, time and place. Are you getting a flat fee for this performance? Are you getting a portion of door sales or ticket sales? Does your pay include travel cost, mileage, or hotel? Or do you need a separate clause for these types of expenses? These are big details when you're budgeting and trying to figure out how much you're going to make or even spend doing a gig. And this is even more important when you have other musicians involved that you need to pay. Responsibilities. Will you provide the instruments and stage lights, and the client will provide the stage and electricity, for example? Is there a piano there? Who's going to tune it? Is this gig at a venue or a club? Is the client responsible for ticketing, or are you renting the space for your own show? Will dinner be provided? Hey, you gotta eat. Location. Where are you performing? On a stage? On dirt? On gravel? Is the gig outside? Is it in direct sunlight? Maybe the client needs to provide a tent so that your clarinet doesn't crack in half from the heat, or there's a downpour halfway through your set. How does the location affect your performance and safety? Clients, particularly for weddings, like to have the musicians in the most aesthetically pleasing location for the performance, regardless of the musician's comfort or safety. I've battled with wedding planners many times in the past, and I've even refused to perform until I got a tent that shaded me from the heat, or the band was placed closer to the electrical outlet so that I didn't have to go to the hardware store and buy 5 more extension cords. This is a big part of the contract, especially if you're playing private events. Deposits and cancellations. Are you expecting a portion of the pay up front with the rest paid later? When do you want to get your money? At what point do you get to keep any of the money in the event of a cancellation? This is super important, especially if you're booking gigs that involve other musicians that you're hiring. If you and your group have agreed to do a wedding gig on July 4th and the bride catches the groom cheating with her friend on July 3rd and calls off the wedding, then you and your band members need to be paid in full. But hopefully you've already got the check in the bank and you're covered. Now comes the real legalese: indemnification clause. This outlines who is responsible for any damages. I usually put that the client is liable and I obligate them to obtain liability insurance or acknowledge that the venue has liability coverage should something happen. I also put in there that any damage to my gear on behalf of a drunk guest is the responsibility of the client. People like to spray champagne at weddings, just a heads up. Also, it's really helpful to have your own personal instrument insurance to cover your gear. If something happens on the gig and you can't sue the client or they're being difficult, at least you can make a claim through your insurance company. They'll cover the replacement cost or repair of your gear and you'll be covered. The Act of God Clause. This is generally boilerplate verbiage that states that the contract is not enforceable during acts of terrorism, extreme weather, major illness, or apocalypse. This came in handy for me during COVID. I had a bunch of wedding gigs booked for my wedding band for the summer of 2020, and then the shutdown came. COVID basically nullified our outstanding contracts because it could legally be defined as an act of God. So I drew up new agreements for the clients which extended the date where I would keep their deposit in the event that they canceled. Those clients who rolled the dice and decided not to cancel their wedding by the extended cutoff date unfortunately lost their deposits. But it meant that I could pay my band and myself at least something for holding those summer dates. It was a win-win, lose-lose situation, but because of my solid contract and the extension that I provided, everything was clear and no one could come after me for keeping their money. The severability clause. This states that if one aspect of the contract is found unenforceable by a judge, the rest of the contract is still intact. And if you want more info on this, ask a lawyer. And then there's usually a sentence at the bottom that states that the contract is governed by the state in which you live, and then finally, signatures and dates. Investing in a good contract is worth its weight in gold and can save your butt down the line. I highly recommend talking to a lawyer and have them help you design a contract template that you can use for your future gigs. All you gotta do is change the information depending on the situation. I also recommend, at least for basic gigs, keeping your contracts to 2 pages or less. If you're trying to book a gig that needs a signature and a deposit right away to lock it in, a client's going to be less intimidated to sign a 2-page agreement as opposed to something that's much longer. In other words, keep it simple if you can. Other bits of advice. Don't assume a gig is on the books until you get a signed contract and a deposit. I've canceled work before because I thought the gig was happening, only for it to fall through, and I lost a lot of money. Remind your potential clients that they'll lose you as the performer if they don't commit right away. Remember, this is your life, this is your business, and you are the asset here. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Bomb with yours truly, Erica von Kleist. If there's something you want to know or want to drop me a line, visit ericavonkleist.com.